Welcome back to Z-Speed and thanks for tuning back in. Today we'll be changing out the spark plugs on the 10th Gen Civic. So if you're interested in that, just stay tuned. Now, when it comes to the 1.5 liter turbo Earth Dreams engine on the Honda Civic, you can see it's super easy to access all four of the coil packs, remove those and get to the spark plugs without really moving anything out of the way. So that's the great part. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Now, the only unusual thing I found when removing these spark plugs was that the spark plug tubes themselves were extremely narrow. So that means that you'll need a 3/8 inch extended 14 millimeter socket with an extension on the back of that to get access to these plugs and remove them, or you can purchase a specialty 14 millimeter socket for removing spark plugs that's magnetized from Amazon for about 12 bucks. You want to do that before you start this job, of course, but I'm going to show you how to do it without the specialty socket. If you've got a 3/8 inch extended socket, you'll be just fine. Okay, before we get started with the project, we need to remove the electrical harness from the back side of each one of these coil packs. You can see I'm using two hands to apply equal pressure on the back side of this clip to remove it. I'm just not sure if these things are brittle or not. The good news is they weren't. I've got 100,000 miles on my car already, so I wasn't sure what the condition was. I also sprayed some 303 aerospace protectant on these clips and wiped them off before I started the job, just to see if I could add a little more flexibility to these clips. They seem to be in pretty good shape, but over time these may get brittle, so you want to spray those with some 303 every now and then just to keep them nice and supple. Now we can go ahead and break the 10 mil bolts that hold each one of the coil packs, and there's just one 10 mil bolt per coil pack using a extended 10 millimeter socket, 1/4 inch ratchet here. They break loose really easily, so just go ahead and break them loose, and then you can hand spin each one of the bolts out. Just make sure you don't cross thread anything. Okay, now we can go ahead and slide the coil pack out of the spark plug chamber, and you want to examine each one of your coil packs for any damage at this point. Look for any cracks or anything unusual, malformations of the coil pack. If you find anything wrong, you're probably going to need to replace that coil pack. Mine all looked really good, so hopefully we can get a few more thousand miles out of these things. Go ahead and remove all the coil packs now. Now, next up, before we can remove the spark plugs, we need to go in and visualize with the light source inside each one of these spark plug tubes themselves. What we're looking for here is any small debris or insects, anything that might have gotten in there over time. And you can see mine are looking really clean in here, but they did not start off that way. 3 out of 4 of my spark plug tubes had either small insects, a few here and there, and or some little dirt and debris lodged at the very bottom. And that's the last thing you want to do, is pull your spark plug out and have some debris fall into the cylinder. So what you want to do is make sure that they're clean, and if they're not, you're going to need some compressed air at this point to blow out the spark plug tube itself. So like I said, I had 3 out of 4 of mine had some small debris, so I got my compressed air out, and I went ahead and made several passes with a compressed air nozzle, and I wasn't able to get everything out with the compressed air nozzle alone, so I added some rubber tubing to the end of it, and that was the only trick I needed to get all the way down in there and blow all the debris out of each one of these tubes. So take your time, make sure you get all of the debris out of each one of your spark plug tubes. Okay, now we're finally ready to remove the spark plug, and we talked about this earlier. I'm just going to use a regular extended 14 millimeter socket, a 3/8 inch with an extension on the back, but I would definitely recommend that you purchase one of these traditional spark plug removal tools that's magnetized for the future, but I want to go ahead and get these out now and swap them out, so I'm going to do it this way, and I'll show you an easy way to get the plug out once we get it loosened. But I bought this car with 100,000 miles on it, and I wasn't sure if they'd ever changed the plugs until I started to remove this plug. Once I started to break this loose right here, and I'll leave you a sound clip in a minute of what it sounded like, I realized right away that these plugs are original, and they were almost, it felt like they were almost fused into the cylinder themselves. I mean, it was extremely hard to break it loose, and once I did, it felt like they just didn't want to spin. So this is, if you run into this situation, you want to be very careful. You do not want to cross thread this spark plug and destroy these threads in your engine here. So go real slow. And as a matter of fact, once I started realizing how much resistance I was having, I just went ahead and removed the ratchet once I got loose enough and hand spun it the rest of the way out, because I definitely did not want to damage those threads. So just be very careful. Hopefully you won't run into this situation, but these have obviously never been changed, and that's what happens if you go a full 100,000 miles before you change the plugs. Yes, they're good up to 100,000 miles, but I would recommend probably every 50,000. And if you're running any extra boost or any modifications, they say you can go every 10,000 miles. You might want to change your spark plug. So, that's up to you. I'm going to leave you a little sound clip right now of what it sounded like. Hear it squeaking. That's metal. That plug's done. It shouldn't be making that much noise. Okay, here's a little trick for you. I'm going to use my coil pack to retrieve my spark plug out of the chamber. Now that's broken loose and unscrewed. You can see all I have to do is just gently dip it in there and grab it. It won't hurt your coil pack at all, and it makes it really simple to get your plug out. If you don't have the traditional spark plug removal socket that's magnetized, this works just great. So you can see it comes right out. You can also put your spark plug back into the chamber as well. So let's take a closer look at our spark plugs now that they're out. Let's try to read them. I'm no expert at all when it comes to reading old spark plugs, but there's plenty of great YouTube videos that explain how to do that. First thing I noticed is there is some carbon buildup. We'd expect to see that, especially after 100,000 miles, but all the structures are intact. That's what we're looking for here. The iridium tip still looks pretty good. The little electrode on top, which is called the ground electrode, that still looks good. There's no caking of carbon on top of here, and the porcelain part underneath the iridium tip still looks pretty good. It's not grossly discolored. It's slightly discolored, but we'd expect to see that after 100,000 miles. Other than that, the threads look a little weird, but we went over that earlier. They were sticking a little bit, and I'm glad we were able to get these things out of the vehicle. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and check the gap on these old plugs to see how much they've widened over time. We'd expect to see them widen a little bit. I'm using one of these AutoZone gap gauges here. These are a little bit cheaper weight and not quite as accurate, but I'm also going to use a feeler gauge here in a minute and show you both ways to go. It's, whatever you happen to have available. This is still semi-accurate, and I'm going to go ahead and start at the 20 thousandths and work my way up towards where it starts to get hard to move the plug onto the gap gauge. So once it starts to tighten up, you want to stop, and mine tightened up right around 32 thousandths of an inch. So the gap has widened a little bit, but it's not that far out of spec. Really, I think the non-SI specs are 28 thousandths to 31 thousandths. So yeah, not too far out. So let's talk about spark plug replacements. We're going to go with the NGK laser iridium plugs. These are the stock plugs that came with your Civic, and there's two different variations. There's the SI version and the non-SI version. I had trouble finding these at my local AutoZone, Advanced, or O'Reilly's, so I had to actually go onto a website, and I'm going to link it below. But you're going to stick with the original equipment here. You're going to get the best performance and gas mileage which if you stay with the NGK, they're excellent plugs. And I went to Edge Auto Sports and I was able to order them from here at a reasonable price here. So if you can't find these plugs at your local auto parts store, you can go on here, and like I said, I'll leave a link below. And this is the SI version right here. As of right now, they're $12.29, and then you go to the bottom. This is a link to the non-SI version of the NGK plugs. So these are really high quality, and I would definitely recommend that you stick with the OEM plugs. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the factory gaps for the Iridium plugs on the Civic Si and the non-SI Civic. And this information is off the Civic X forum. And it says these plugs are supposed to come out of the box at 30 thousandths to 32 thousandths of an inch pre-gapped right out of the box. That's what they should come out as. Of course, we can't always depend on that, and you want to always double check your gap, but that's what they're supposed to come out of the box set at. And down below here, we've got the settings for the 1.5 liter turbo SI, and the SI gap tolerances are 0.7 to 0.75 millimeters, or 27 thousandths to 29 thousandths of an inch. Both of these readings are on a feeler gauge, and I did pick up a feeler gauge, so we're going to show you that a little bit later, but whichever you want to go by, millimeters or thousandths of an inch, they're both on there. And then the non-SI Civic is, the settings are 0.7 to 0.8 millimeters, or 28 thousandths to 31 thousandths of an inch. So those are your two factory gaps ranges for your Iridium plugs right there. Now, it also says that torque specs are 10 to 14.5 foot-pounds, and that these plugs should last 100,000 miles, but we're going to change ours after about 50,000 miles from now on. Okay, let's go ahead and open this plug up and check it out before we gap it. And the first thing I noticed was that these plugs do have a protective sleeve over the end of the spark plug, and that's what you were looking for. A high quality plug will have a sleeve to protect your gap. You don't want to pick up any aftermarket plugs that don't have sleeves, because they're most likely going to be way out of range for the gap, because they get knocked around pretty easily and then they can change the gap. So you're looking for something with a sleeve. Okay, we're going to go ahead and check the out-of-the-box gap, and then we're going to go ahead and gap it to 28 thousandths of an inch. Now, this is the cheaper version. This is the AutoZone little gap measuring device that they have. It's pretty cheap, and I'm going to show you a feeler gauge as well, but I'm going to go ahead and show you how to use this, and we're going to go in on the end that's probably, 20 thousandths of an inch. Start right here where it's loose, and then you're going to work your way towards the actual gap that's set. You want to go in and just go real slow. What you don't want to do is damage the Iridium tip, and so you want to be very gentle with it here. You don't want to get very aggressive. That tip's very small and would be easy to damage, so you just want to go very lightly here. And so I'm slowly working my way towards the gap, and once it gets kind of tight, that's when I'm going to stop. And basically it was right at 30 thousandths of an inch, so I want to go to 28 thousandths, so I'm going to just use this feeler gauge right here. It's a piece of metal. You just need something hard, like a metal table or a metal bar, or something that you can press down on, and you can push the end of this little spark plug down just a little bit. You won't go too crazy here. You just want to start off and kind of get the feel of the spark plug. You don't want to get too aggressive, and I didn't really push that hard, and it pretty much came in right at 28 thousandths of an inch. So it was perfect the first run, so I was pretty happy with that. I got 28 thousandths, and I'm going to show you a feeler gauge here in a minute. But yeah, it's not too hard, but if you're afraid that you might damage your plug, and I don't blame you if you are, if you've never done it before, you can practice with your old plug. And here's my old plug right here, and here's a little metal bar that I had laying around, so I'm going to use this to press the end of the spark plug down. But this is probably a better way to go if you've never really changed a gap. Grab your old plug, grab a piece of metal that you can press down on and just practice with this one. So I'm just going to go ahead and push down. I measured this one at 30 thousandths, maybe, or was it 32 thousandths, right around there. And here's my feeler gauge. This is a little more accurate. It's a little easier to use because it's a nice thin bar that's uniform here. And I went ahead and pushed that down. This is the 7 millimeter or 28 thousandths of an inch. And you can see right here that I got it first shot. So that's perfect right there. And if you close it down too much, you can just bend it back open a little bit and try it again. The main thing here is to be very careful of this iridium tip here. See, I'm kind of just barely scooting it over the tip. If you get too aggressive, you're probably going to damage that, and that's not what you want to do. So be careful with the tip of that. Just a quick note on aftermarket tunes. So you can see I've got a Honda aftermarket E-tune, and it doesn't matter what you're running, but if you've increased your boost, you definitely want to stay with a smaller gap size, let's say 27 to 28 hundredths, because you want to make sure that you've got good spark when you're running higher boost levels. And I'm not going to go in depth in this, but I just recommended to use these smaller gaps for aftermarket tunes. I didn't mention this earlier, but you definitely want to protect your spark plug tubes while you're gapping your spark plugs. I've got some butcher paper over this, and you never know, there's some flying friends going around the garage, and this is the deep south. We got some big wingers out here, so you don't want any of those guys flying down your spark plug tubes. Now that we've got these things gapped and we're ready to place them back into the spark plug tubes, and we're going to use that same trick that we used earlier. We're going to use our coil pack to just slide it over the end of the spark plug, and then we can just ever so delicately go right down the middle here. Just want to be gentle so you don't destroy that gap we just set. You just want to be very careful not to ding it, and just place it right in there. And you can see I'm just going to ever so slightly start to thread this thing in. So I'm just going to be very careful so we don't cross thread, of course, and it's going in super smooth compared to those old plugs coming out. These are going in nice and smooth, so that's nice right there. So once you get a few revolutions on your spark plugs, you can go ahead and remove your coil pack, and then we can go ahead and get our 14 millimeter socket and our extension, and we can go ahead and finish hand tightening. I'm going to hand tighten mine all the way in. I'm not going to use ratchet until it gets too hard to turn here. That just assures us that we don't cross thread those spark plugs. It's the last thing you want to do. And I would also recommend, if you have a shorter extension, that might be a little bit better. This thing's kind of long, and you can see it's wobbling a little bit, and you just want to cut any type of wobble down if possible. So if you have a little bit shorter extension, it'd be a little bit better way to go, but that's the only one I had right there. So once I get it hand tight to where I can't turn it anymore, I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to snug it up real tight. I'm not going to use a torque wrench on this one because I just want to be able to feel the plug as I'm tightening it up. I just want to make sure that we don't get any cross threading going on. So I'm just going to get to where it's real snug, and then just tweak it a little bit tighter, and then that should be good enough. You can always check them the next time you fill up your tank or something. If you're worried about them coming loose or something, you can go back and double check to make sure they're snug. But this right here feels pretty good, and it really won't turn any more further, so I'm happy with that. Okay, just a little trick that I like to do is spray some 303 aerospace protectant on a rag, and then give my coil pack a nice little rub down. You don't want to coat too much of this stuff on there, but this stuff is really great at prolonging the life of rubber and plastic. I use it on all my engine bay parts. It really works quite well. I've been using it for years, and this might just keep this coil pack a little more supple and keep it from cracking prematurely. There's a lot of heat in the engine bay, and this might just prolong the life of your coil pack here. So now we're ready to place it back in. I'm sure somebody's going to say, hey, can you interchange these coil packs? And yes, you can, is a short answer to that. But you can see see I've lined mine up in the same exact order that I took them out. I even placed the exact same bolt I took out of each chamber and placed it right beside each other so I could put them right back where they came from. But of course you can mix and match if you want to, but I like to keep everything in the same order I found it. So once you get the coil pack placed into the spark plug tube, you want to hold it down with some pressure and then go ahead and hand thread your 10mm bolt back in while you're keeping pressure on your coil pack. Once you get it nice and snugged up, you can go ahead now and use your ratchet to just finish tightening it up. You don't have to get really crazy with it. You don't want to strip the bolt, of course. Just make sure it's nice and snugged up by hand. And once you get that snugged up, then we're going to go ahead and place the electrical harness back onto the coil pack. And with this one, you just want to make sure that you hear a clicking sound once you place it back onto the coil pack. So just grab it and then slowly push it onto the coil pack and you should hear it snap back on. Okay, once you finish installing all of your coil packs, you want to go ahead now and start the engine, and we're going to check the idle to make sure there's no misfires. Okay, time for a cold start. So once you let it warm up, you want to make sure that it's idling perfectly. There should be no misfires and there should be no rough idle. If you're having any issues like that, you need to recheck your coil pack to make sure they're seated correctly and also check the electrical connections to the coil packs. That should remedy the problem, hopefully. And until next time, you know what to do. Just keep on repairing.